Hey, Jeff. Jeff,
Yeah,
what are you doing?
I'm catching up on my newspaper reading. Only about a century behind. Did you know the Watchtower had a secret newspaper?
Let's tell everybody about it.
William Abbott had a little paper in St. Paul, Minnesota called the St. Paul Enterprise. It was concerned about the politics and news of the area in St. Paul, Minneapolis. In 1911, he had a fire and lost everything and had to start all over again from scratch. His little paper survived for at least another decade or so, even after his death. Abbott was an editor of this paper. It was his local newspaper, and he also was involved in politics. You can see he ran for county commissioner, and that was while he was a Bible student.
You're not allowed to do that.
Now, in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt was campaigning with the slogan, "We stand in Armageddon and we battle for the Lord."
Now to you men who in your turn have come together to spend and dispense in the endless crusade against Rome, to you who face the future resolute and confident, to you who strive in a spirit of brotherhood for the betterment of our nation, to you who gird yourselves for this great new fight in the never-ending warfare for the good of humankind, I say in closing what in that speech I said in closing, we stand at Armageddon and we battle for the Lord.
So when there were interesting news stories, Charles Taze Russell would take advantage of it. So he would give lectures on whatever subject was at hand. And when Teddy Roosevelt did this, he started speaking on the Battle of Armageddon.
Now that's an original ticket from...
That's an original ticket, yeah.
How do you stumble across these things? Where do you get that one from?
I know a lot of collectors who've just kind of have shared things or exchanged things. This would have been a lecture poster at the time. This is the same time period.
And that's the way they did those things back then.
Right.
They staple and nail and tack
right. This
poster
would be the back
announcing
of
a speech or a...
This is the back of Bible Students Monthly paper. Is what that is. William Abbott grabbed what he found on Armageddon, and later on when he talked about how he published this, he thought it was a subject of a Democratic campaign argument. He just saw the title and he put it in. Well,
did he read it before he put it in there, or he just threw it in there?
He just looked at the title and he just threw it in there. I mean,
probably
if you read
not good for a newspaper to do, but it worked out for ultimately for what they were trying to accomplish. So,
and it worked out for us historians as well, because this has become a boon for a lot of historical research for this time period going forward. There's a lot of material in this paper that just would not be known unless we had this paper. Now, this caused quite a controversy. Then people start writing in, and some disagree and some agree. Actually, he even said, if you're so weak-kneed that you're afraid to put your name at the bottom of the letter, I'm not going to publish it. You could disagree, but disagree publicly.
Cool.
Right? That's only fair.
And that also covers, if you've got one person against you, they could write 10 letters anonymously. So right. Remember, there wasn't tracking email back then. They had to say, okay, sign it and, at least get a name attached to it if anyone, asks about a conflict or something. How the sermons won the enterprise.
How the sermons won the enterprise. So there's a picture of Mr. Charles Dick, and then there's William Abbott, and he's explaining how it happened. In an almost joking way, we told Mr. Dick that if he would get us 100 new subscribers at $1 a piece, we would run the sermons for a year at least. Mr. Dick surprised us by securing them in a few days, and the list has grown to over 700 in about a year's time, and it kept growing from there.
Which was a lot of money at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he liked what he saw, and he became a Bible student himself. And so this became a Bible student paper. So all the articles in the paper are almost all Bible student related within a year and a half. And you'll see some of the headlines: "Life prisoner rejoices in the hope of present truth," or "finds the truth after worldwide searching." So this would have been, these would have been quaint little subjects that the Bible students of the period would have been interested in. It became worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So there were articles in the paper that I saw, I was looking through a lot of these recently, that said, the sun doesn't set on the Enterprise subscribers. In Europe, people were getting these in Europe, in England, Australia, Canada, all over the United States.
Now,
It had a
was
wide
that again?
circulation.
Not to beat it to death, but was that by telegraph back then, or were they physically shipping them, and they get them later? At a
I think
later.
they were physically shipping them, and they would get them later. But it's an interesting thing, and for those of us doing historical research, on the back page of the paper is voices of the people, or what our readers say, and this would be all letters from the Bible students of the time period, and poems. It helped me to do some of the research on Rutherford, to track his whereabouts, and also some of the other things that are said. If you're wondering, did they believe a certain thing? You can read what's written, but if you read what people are writing about what's written, you can see how they understood it. Sometimes it's not what is believed, but why it's believed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find a lot of that in those letters. The letters are very, very interesting, especially when there were changes over the years. You could see this in the discussions. There's some interesting stories in there about the judge's son, writes a couple letters to the paper. And those have been very important. Malcolm. His letters have been very important for understanding more about the judge. And we'll get into that in future discussion. As I said, it became a Bible student paper, so they published a lot of photographs of many of the Bible students around the country. You'll see William Abbott in a lot of these, and his wife in Washington, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and back home.
They're covering the Brooklyn Tabernacle and headquarters there.
Correct. Yeah.
Also.
So that
shows
there.
how tied in they were, and it was a Bible students newspaper.
You'll see Charles Taze Russell up there in the upper left corner a couple times in that
in his signature derby.
Yeah, exactly. A shot of the Niagara Falls, and Abbott, the editor of the paper, standing there by the falls. Actually, the woman in the upper right corner,
Abbott's
in
wife.
White, that's Abbott's wife. Yeah. There's a photograph at the bottom of one of the papers I saw where she says she had to stay at home and take care of the little doggies, and she's holding a puppy or something like that in her hand.
And that's an interesting picture of a booth that the Bible students rented at the San Francisco Fair.
Right, and below that is showing the photodrama creation outdoors. To the left of that photo is the Bethel family partaking temple food on Christmas morning in 1914. The typical paper generally was a World War. So generally you had news about the First World War on the front cover. You'd have Charles Taze Russell's lecture for the week. And then you would have other Bible student related articles or lectures by other Bible students. In this case, this would be Benjamin Barton. And he died a few months before Charles Taze Russell. Charles Taze Russell gave his funeral talk. And a lot of the articles from the St. Paul Enterprise were combined, and the Enterprise published them in a book later on.
And adding the war to that, because remember, it was 1914 when they were thinking the heavenly ascension was going to take place. And so the war was a very important factor in their teaching and knowing that the Gentile times ended for them. So they were very up to date in reading about it and following it.
Yeah, and you'll see they also tied into the Gentile times, which the Jehovah's Witnesses no longer believe today. They had the thought that
they don't believe in the Gentile times anymore.
They've got a different view of it,
Okay, you have to bring me up to speed on that. Do that later, but this is you always catch me off guard with this stuff. It changes more than you could keep up with it.
So
they don't believe in the Gentile times.
The idea was that at the end of the Gentile times, the nation of Israel would return as a nation.
Yes.
That was one of the main signs that they were looking for.
Yes.
But because of replacement theology, they became Israel, and it was their return to the spiritual promised land. And when everything becomes a spiritual reality or an invisible reality, there's no tangible evidence or proof for anything. Right?
But they still believe the Gentile times ended in 1914, right?
They do, but they don't tie it into any tangible thing. Everything's an invisible event. Jesus came to inspect the temple in 1919. He inspected us, and we're the only good ones. and everyone else is bad, right? That's the main concept of how they believe the Gentile times to be. That was the whole meaning of it. It all started there. All prophecy starts with them in 1914.
From that point forward.
Yeah. They felt very strongly that the Jews returning to Palestine would be a sign of the end of the Gentile times.
And again, a lot of the
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses today don't realize how firmly their society supported Israel.
Yeah, actually, I just read Judge Rutherford's book on Comfort for the Jews. Other than the 1925 thing, it was actually not that bad of a book.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at any evangelical book on the subject, looking at the return of Israel to their land as a fulfillment of prophecy, and it would be comparable. It would be very, very similar.
So he wrote that book in 1925, and then 6 years in the early 30s, 6 years or so later, he says that's not true?
Yeah, that's in the book Vindication Volume 2 specifically. He starts what would be classified as replacement theology.
Okay, so that didn't even progress. That was just like, boom, here it is.
A
Here's
complete
the book.
90-degree turn.
And now we're the Jews, they're not.
Yeah, so everything good about prophecy about Israel, that's all about us. Everything bad about prophecy about Israel, that's everybody else.
Except for the locusts.
Which just changed a couple of weeks ago.
Which is back to, okay.
And that's in our previous discussion we had on the Cedar Point Convention, right? Inside the paper, they would have wanted. And by today's standard, they'd be a little cute, but it was like the Craigslist, the Buku, Match.com, or even the Facebook for the Bible students of the period. I'm looking for, we offer a good permanent home for a widow who is in the truth and who will keep house. A position wanted, a widow with a daughter, 10, and a son, 13 and a half, wishes a position as a housekeeper. Unfortunately, they were not in the same issue, but they were a few issues apart. So maybe they made a connection there. Wanted a sister in the truth.
That wasn't uncommon back then, a room and board type situation.
Right. Wanted a sister in the truth to make her home with a truth family of 2 and help with a photograph gallery. No experience necessary. Vermont maple syrup. I'm tapping maple trees by halves to get money ahead to go co-portering as long as the money holds out. Some of these are kind of sad. A widow with a daughter 10 and a son 13 and a half years old. So her husband died young. Here's the one about Pilgrim J.A. Bonet. In the Society's farm and cemetery near Pittsburgh, has room as a future home for 2 capable truth sisters on Bible house terms. Same as at Bethel, and will be glad to hear from a mother and daughter or 2 sisters. He wants 2 or 3 truth brethren with good physical ability to join him on the Society's cemetery farm service on the Bible house terms and make the place their future home. And the photo, that's the grave of Russell with the farmhouse at the bottom. You'll see that is at the Watchtower cemetery plot. So right at the, Russell's buried up on the hill, right at the bottom of the hill is where Bonet's home was. We'll talk about that in a couple slides.
Which is now what everybody questions, is that a Masonic temple?
Yeah, there's a Masonic temple right at the bottom of the hill now.
Where the farm used to be.
But a couple of years before the pyramid is built there, that marked the grave sites. There's also that shot of Abbott sitting on the porch there. So that's a very important historical photograph there. You'll see the one in the top is talking about manna photos with a signature. So here's an example of one. So any Watchtower collector you'll sometimes see these little photographs glued into the page with a signature. Oh, I just saw J.F. Rutherford in here.
You're kidding.
No, hold on.
Don't tell me you have his book.
No. Hey, oh yeah, here it is.
He autographed it.
Yep.
Did you know this?
No, I did not until now. Literally, this moment is the first I saw it, and I've looked through it before and never thought about it.
Is that matching his other?
Yeah, it does. It does. Sometimes they would advertise their lectures. You'll see Rutherford's lecture there. Or they wrote booklets or books separate from the society. They would do their own things, and then they would advertise them in the paper here.
What's with this cryptology of the kingdom?
This was a book that was published as a series of articles in the Enterprise, and they were going through the parables of the New Testament, Jesus' parables, and writing how they interpreted it to be.
And you got a copy of it.
I have a copy of the book. I actually have, through a collector friend, I actually have Hollister's original copy with his handwritten notes, handwritten corrections. So this would have been the author's personal copy, Horace Hollister. It's leather bound, and he had his name inscribed on it. And you'll see this is what the book looked like, and it's published by. Well, there's a cool looking chart, by the way.
So how did you get this particular copy?
It says published by the St. Paul Enterprise.
And stolen. The next one, stolen. That's what you're.
That one is interesting. That's interesting because it says stolen on December 4th. 1.5 passenger Ford car, 1917 model, has cut in back a front seat about 3 inches long, sewed up. This car was bought with miracle wheat to be used in service of the truth. We'll give $25 for return of car or information about its whereabouts. It says
they were stealing cars back then too. Well, I guess that's when it started. Really, if you want to, we just perfected it. And I see in
before that was horse thieves, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is horsepower. The St. Paul Enterprise was controversial when it needed to be. Charles Taze Russell died 1 week before this paper was published. The St. Paul Enterprise, November 14th editorial. The publisher's wife knew last week of the opposition of a few at Brooklyn to the publication of any news about Pastor Russell's death in the Enterprise previous to the appearance of the Memorial Watchtower, December 1st. They wanted to wait an entire month. She knew in time to follow their dictation, if that course had seemed best. But being able to judge the best course only by her own impulses, she tried to put herself in the place of subscribers to the Enterprise and imagine herself off in some distant, isolated place, receiving 4 issues of the Enterprise with not a word of news about the all-important event.
I like how the St. Paul Enterprise did it anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And for back then, that's common sense. That's courtesy. Today, obviously, you could get news as fast as millibytes travel through fiber. But back then, she's literally right, 4 issues, and then how long after that? So they could be, like she said, they could be reading all this stuff, not knowing what's going on, and then get, cold cocked with the pastor died and nobody told us.
Why should the Watchtower control everything? Why should they control the news? It was important.
So
it was a newsworthy event.
Control things back then, starting back then.
The first week.
Yeah, it's like right after all of a sudden. And I say this because here he's just passed on and already it started.
This is an important point, and this is going to be new information for a lot of Watchtower historians. The politicking about who was going to be the next president was already beginning. So on the front page of the newspaper of this St. Paul Enterprise, Brother Macmillan is so petulant, lacking in tact and egotistical that I have been tempted very sorely by him. I love Brother Macmillan, but I cannot do other than resist several little traits he's possessed with. I could tell of a heartbreaking story of his persistent attempts to humiliate me, but have striven as bravely as I can to permit none of it to disturb the serenity or even the tenor of my way.
And who's writing this?
Abbott, the editor of the Enterprise. Yep. He was supposed to speak at the funeral, and Macmillan stepped in and said, "Nope, you don't have any part in it." It was because Macmillan couldn't control the Enterprise. Right? He could control the Watchtower. In that particular article, the same one where he writes about Macmillan, he says, "It is within the bounds of possibility, if not probability, that some will be led astray by ambition or pride to have their own way now that the master director is gone. It is possible that some will become sulky and rebel against the arrangement."
You know,
how prophetic.
And we'll get into it more when we discuss the will, because the names don't match up. So we'll save this one. But good catch to go back to that.
And we might have a different opinion on the will, but it'll be good to discuss it. That's a future discussion coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, well, why? And I'm surprised they even published this, and with name.
Now, the first thing I get out of this is the recalling of the latter story of Jehovah's Witnesses saying ambitious men were trying to steal the Watchtower and take over. Now, here very early, prior to all that came out, here we see a whole other show of evidence of, hey, we want to print it first. Hey, we want to control this. So it leaves a lot open. Who was really the ambitious people trying to take over the society, trying to control it? This is a good find for that. And the date of it is just perfect for all this.
Yeah, and it's written at the time. It's a firsthand account. So it's not somebody claiming, 30, 40 years later, like in Macmillan's book, Faith on the March. This is what I remember that happened. But his facts are a little fuzzy at that time. This is written right at the time. So
he's a reputable person.
Yeah. He was well respected.
It's in the newspaper. He didn't not sign it. He just came right out and said, this is what it is. So it is very interesting, like you said, what happened shortly after this then even. But we'll do a whole other discussions on that.
Right. And this is signed by him. This is his article.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone knew who the abbot was. Everyone knew the paper. Everyone knew Macmillan. And so this was probably not a surprise. It would be a surprise for those who read Macmillan's book, who doesn't share with you all the background of what was going on at the time. Now, this is interesting.
Now, interestingly enough, this should be in the JW book, The Proclaimers, where they're showing other stuff going on, how this all happened. Well, why did this get left out? There's two sides to every story, and apparently this side is left out.
Oh, well, if you're going to be a historian, you should try to tell both sides of the story, warts and all, whether it's favorable towards your side or not favorable. And then once the reader has all the facts in front of him, then he can decide, here's all the facts. Here, that's probably what happened. It's always a two-way street. It isn't just my side is right and your side is wrong. There's two sides to every argument.
But to the victor, they get to write the history. They're saying they're ambitious. Well, here, people have another side of the coin.
Exactly. So that's a very important point. And that's on the front page of the paper 2 weeks after Russell died. I'm surprised he even published it in the paper either way. But, it tells you right away who's the one who's striving for control right off the start. Macmillan's in the lead.
Good
historically.
Point. Yeah, good point. Let's this is good stuff.
So, January 1917, a couple more months goes by, and Rutherford is elected president. Rutherford succeeds the pastor. He's the next president of the Watchtower Society. There it is on the front page of the paper. That's holding history right there. 2 months after Rutherford was elected president, William Abbott, editor of the Enterprise, passed away. Now, his wife was still in charge of the paper, but they did have C.E. Stewart, who is one of the Watchtower board. He was the editor of the Enterprise going forward. They were tied in with the society, but they still were semi-independent. And when we get into our next discussion on the man who dared disfellowship Rutherford, we'll actually discuss a little bit of this, showing how they were actually independent. but still tied in with the society.
And yes, he was brought up on charges to be disfellowshipped.
In Christmas of 1919, they changed the name of the paper to the New Era Enterprise.
So
And
they enjoyed their Christmas.
yes,
It appeared.
look at Santa Claus everywhere.
And I see he's got a bag full of presents.
Here's one with Thanksgiving on it. Good news. There's the Easter message right there.
Well, they took it in the correct context. It was just celebrating that Christ was born. You know, they didn't turn it into a big birthday party or a pagan ritual.
Russell was a real strong Zionist, and so was Rutherford in his early ministry. When he started replacement theology, that changed. You can see Palestine there getting ready for the kingdom. The Enterprise became the Netflix of the time period for the Bible students. In the 1920s, the Enterprise was publishing fictional stories, a couple chapters per week. And so if you could save every issue of the paper, then you could binge read the entire story, just like you binge watch an entire series on Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that today. So I found that interesting. Some of the stories are pretty good. Some of them are lacking in character development, but depended on the writer. It was also where the Bible students would hear the news, what was going on against Rutherford and the writers of The Finished Mystery. And we'll actually talk a little bit about that in our next discussion on the man who dared disfellowship Rutherford. And the final issue that the Minnesota Historical Society had of the New Era Enterprise was May 1st, 1928. And you'll see the headline there is "The Chosen People of God, Their Hopes Nearing Fruition. World's Hope Centers in the Jewish Messiah." They were still looking for the return of the Jews as a homeland, as a fulfillment of prophecy. That would change, as we said, a few years later. And right after this issue is the end of film. We don't know how the paper ended. There's nothing in this issue that says, hey, you know, this is the end of the paper. This is our very last issue. Just done.
Typical of how
So
they would have done it. Let's get control of it and then bury it. How did you get these films from
so
I want to reveal your sources?
Hold on. Where does he get those wonderful toys?
back to that again. There was a Watchtower collector.
Because some
He
of
told
them,
me about this Historical Society. He said, go to the Historical Society and you should be able to buy the microfilms of it. So we paid a good penny for the microfilms and then several $100 more just to get the microfilm scanned. So we put quite a bit of money just to get these. But historically, it's been an incredible resource an incredible resource for a lot of the historical research that a lot of ex-JWs and JW historians are doing now is because of these papers.
So Jeff, can you explain how this is a secret newspaper?
Remember, the Watchtower didn't distribute this. There's some items in the paper that don't quite fit the historical narrative that the Watchtower has presented.
Basically, they wanted to forget that part of history by not mentioning it. So it's not a secret that you couldn't find yourself if you looked for it. It's a secret in that they didn't take the time or bother to publish themselves.
There are several lists of Watchtower literature. The St. Paul Enterprise and New Era Enterprise are not in most of them. It's an unknown paper. It's an unknown segment of history. They didn't want to advertise the Enterprise in the Watchtower or the Golden Age because they didn't have complete control over it. It was an independent paper. But our next discussion is going to continue this, but it's going to be about the man who dared disfellowship Judge Rutherford. And some of the information we found was from these very papers. So until then, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. and keep reading. Thank you again, Paul. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.